Welcome back, everyone. I know it's been a while. I've had a lot going on in the background, and of course, my main hard drive up and died. But today I'd like to talk about a video that I spent a lot of time working on. I would like to preface, of course, that the original script, recorded sections, and my datasheet were all lost when my hard drive died. With much of the important information memorized, however, and having worked with the data so intimately, I will be discussing the topic anyway in this video, along with my conclusions. The original video was about Otzdarva's no perk, no add-on, and 30-second AFK experiment. And in before the naysayers, you know who you are. I'm sending my hard drive out for data recovery. If the datasheet can be recovered, I will share it in a future video, along with the file in a Google Doc for everyone to access. If the data cannot be recovered, oh well, I'm not spending another 2 weeks analyzing 12 hours of gameplay by Otz and Tru3s repeatedly with a stopwatch. So without further ado, I would like to begin by addressing some of the major issues in Otz's iteration of his own experiment, and of course I will continue to address other issues as this video goes on. First, and most obviously, at no point was Otz AFK for 30 seconds. Otz may have stood in one place, but he spent the time proactively looking around and gathering as much information as possible and trying to locate survivors. Notably, in 4 of his matches, he wasn't even standing still for 30 seconds, or he outright flaunted his own rules in order to gain an advantage. The most notable offenders being his Nurse, Executioner, and Cenobite matches. So for the sake of accuracy, if we were to factor for all matches in which Otz was AFK at the beginning of the match, with forgiveness of course to minor false starts, Otz would have 0 matches to analyze. However, I will be discussing these matches anyway, since I believe the data I gathered gives very important insights into a lot of what is wrong with Dead by Daylight. Now, before the baby-raging keyboard crusaders come running to Otz's defense with cop-outs such as, well, it's his experiment, I want to remind you all of Otz's expressed purpose for this experiment. Otz repeatedly stated during his run of the experiment that the purpose was to see if the game was survivor-sided or not. Otz has been a very vocal opponent of the notion that this game is survivor-sided in the past, and the purpose of being AFK for 30 seconds was to give the survivors a head start. Otz gave his opponents no such head start, and this would partly explain why, of all the people I've seen who recorded data, Otz had the highest self-reported kill rate, which brings us to the next set of issues with Otz's iteration of his own experiment, that being the rules. The most glaring issue with Otz's rules is his declaration that any rage quits would count as kills. Although I can understand the logic behind this rule, the main problem is that it grants the killer player carte blanche to play in the douchiest way possible in order to drive players into quitting the game. I am aware that this may not have been Otz's intention, however, the result is no less the same. I also understand that it was Otz's intention to camp, tunnel, and slug his opponents as much as possible in order to compensate for his self-imposed handicaps, which is itself also a problem. During Otz's iteration, Otz had openly expressed numerous times that he was playing in a way to pad his numbers in preparation for when he believed he would play against better teams. In other words, Otz was not playing in a way to test the strength of survivors, but rather to see if he could win in spite of the self-imposed handicaps and to see how well he could do. Now I want to be clear, I do not believe that Otz did this with any intention of deceiving his audience. However, with that said, we must also reject any and all of Otz's conclusions from his own experiment, because the experiment he actually ran was different from the experiment he said he would run. Conflicting experiments produce conflicting data and conclusions, but nevertheless, the data produced from his experiment is still valuable for other reasons. This is where true talent fits into the discussion. Now, multiple streamers have attempted Otz's experiment. However, the vast majority of them admit to rampant camping, tunneling, and slugging, all artificially skewing the numbers favorably towards killer. As such, I did not include or analyze any of their footage if such footage was available. However, Tru did not play in such a way to rack up such a high score. In fact, Tru only camped survivors at a rate of 2.5%, tunneled survivors at a rate of 2.5%, and slugged survivors in only 16% of his games. I would also like to note that any tunneling by Tru was expressly not intentional, and notably happenstance. During Tru's iteration, no players rage quit, either by disconnecting or refusing to play. No survivors bled to death, and no survivors were given the hatch. There were no disqualifiable or controversial matches, nor was there really anything remarkable of note. And this is what makes Tru's iteration much more qualified to answer the question Otz was seeking to answer with his experiment. So with an average kill rate of 1.2 and an average time of around 5 minutes for all generators to have been completed, with the vast majority of teams completing all generators, and with 25% of the games having generators completed in under or around 4 minutes, the evidence overwhelmingly says yes, Dead by Daylight is irrefutably survivor-sided, especially at high MMR. This assessment is based off the dev's own design philosophy of 2 kills and 2 live, and subsequently the implemented skill-based matchmaking, or SBMM. Furthermore, this is a matter that has already been discussed in detail by Tide Time over 4 years ago.
A game like this, for how basic it is, comes with what is known as a skill cap. No matter how good you get at this game, killers have a limitation dictated by the very mechanics they play by and the opposing survivor team. You could be the best killer in the world, but time itself is against you at every waking second. Even the best killer that plays optimally, the survivors would have to avoid playing optimally in order for the killer to stand even the slightest of chances. As the game stands, the minimum required time to complete all generators is 2 minutes and 40 seconds, excluding any time it takes to find or walk and or run to the generator in the first place. This is only considering that 3 generators are fixed by 3 survivors at the start, with 1 survivor being chased by the killer. Then 1 survivor is hooked, 1 goes for the save and or is chased by the killer, and to complete the final 2 generators. Once all generators are online, it's an additional 20 seconds to open the door, making it a total of 3 minutes minimum, of course without walking, to complete the game. And of course this is the fastest possible outcome and not always probable, with the killer interrupting the flow of gameplay with their perks and their presence, but it's important to understand this 3-minute minimum because the results are actually not that outlandish or hard to achieve. It's actually quite common for a single chase against well-versed survivors to take approximately 3 generators, and I'm not talking survive with friends, I'm just talking 4 random rank 1 survivors are capable of accomplishing some massive loops that could just lead the other 3 veteran players to just finish their generators and know exactly what to do.
Just to be clear, that 2 minute and 40 second gen time is still valid in today's DBD. For those who are confused by such a low time, that's without any perks or items. This means realistically, there's no reason that survivors should take more than 4 minutes to complete generators and escape, other than a complete lack of skill. And that's without killers giving survivors a head start and using a full set of perks. In other words, Otz's experiment is entirely redundant since his game had already been proven to be survivor-sided since pretty much the beginning of the game itself. Now, before we discuss Otz's gameplay, I want to explain how everything was calculated to avoid any confusion. All incidents of camping, tunneling, and slugging were tabulated before the 4th generator was complete. This is because, generally speaking, camping, tunneling, and slugging is all generally regarded as acceptable around this point of the game since it's considered as the end game, which does differ from the end game collapse. Acts of camping, tunneling, and slugging were all calculated regardless of being a choice, accident, or induced by the survivors themselves. Now to discuss Otz's gameplay. Otz camped survivors at a rate of about 33%. That's 1 out of every 3 survivors he encountered, and he typically camped survivors for a full health state, which is anywhere from 70 to 80 seconds from picking the survivor up to bringing him to the hook to camping for the entire health state. Otz tunneled survivors at a rate of 20 to 30%. That's 1 out of every 3 to 5 survivors. Otz slugged in 62% of his games. Otz camped, tunneled, and slugged in 92% of his games. The only two games he did not camp, tunnel, or slug in were his Trapper and Ghostface games, with his Ghostface game being of considerable note since he managed to get 3 kills against a comparably skilled Survivor team. The average time for survivors to complete all generators against Otz was around 8 minutes. It should also be noted, however, that only 6 teams managed to complete all of their generators. Otz boasted a kill rate of 3.15, but this all circles back to issues with Otz's own rules. Otz considered rage quits as kills, knowing that he was going to be playing in a manner to induce survivors into rage quitting. While this does seem dishonest, and really it is, I don't believe that Otz made this decision with any intent to deceive his audience, but rather as a massive oversight to the effects that such a consideration and playstyle would have on his results. Moreover, Otz also included other incidences that do not, or at least should not, qualify as kills for his own personal score. These kills include survivors who bled out, survivors who gave up, and survivors who were given the hatch. The reason why this is dishonest of Otz, even if dishonesty was not intended, is because disconnects, bleedouts, and hatch escapes do not have a positive impact on a killer's MMR, thus reducing the overall impact of winning that comes with having successfully killed multiple survivors, especially in consecutive matches. Furthermore, these don't even count as kills in-game, thus Otz should not have been rewarding himself with kills he didn't actually earn. Finally, the most glaring issue is that Otz should not be rewarding himself for bullying survivors out of the game. Matches that result in players quitting do not provide any usable data when determining the balance of the game, since they have the typical effect of drastically and unfairly shifting the balance of the game in favor of the killer. Even the devs know this, which is why they do not include any games with disconnects when gathering data. As such, any game where survivors gave up mid-game or earlier will be noted as disqualifying, even if the kills are counted. Wherefore, when calculating Otz's true kill rate, only kills that have a positive effect on Otz's MMR are counted. And that's where the baby rage from his fans usually begins. Otz did not have a kill rate of 3.15. Otz had a real kill rate of about 2.72 without disqualified matches. That said, Otz had 7 different games that are considered disqualified because players either disconnected or rage quit in-game, thus lowering his kill rate across 26 games even further. So what exactly did Otz's experiment prove? Well, Otz proved that any killer can win if they camp, tunnel, and slug against any survivor team of lower skill. And yes, the survivor teams Otz went against were of notably lower skill. It's this point that generally gets angry, tear-filled keyboard crusaders rushing to Otz's defense, usually making arguments of how survivor skill cannot be determined by watching them in-game. I'm not joking, that's been the most common defense thus far. But the simple reality is just that. Otz did, in fact, go against teams of notably lower skill for the majority of his games. During Otz's matches, the survivors were simply not doing any generators. They didn't loop well at all, they didn't use dead hard effectively, or were often dead harding past windows or into walls, or just out into the open, away from the loop that they were trying to run around. When Otz would camp a survivor, there were often times when all 3 remaining survivors would come charging in for clumsy and uncoordinated rescue. When we compare this to how many survivor teams were abusing bad map design and broken mechanics against Tru, the difference is night and day. In fact, Choi, a content creator who also plays on EU servers, ran Otz's experiment twice, once around the time that Otz plays and again when Tru normally plays. According to Choi, he conducted himself the same way both times by camping, tunneling, and slugging. Choi's results were self-reported kill rates of 2.8 when playing when Otz plays and 2.2 when Tru plays, noting that survivors were markedly better around the time that Tru Talent played. Now, I do want to be clear. I don't believe that Otz intentionally deranked himself or deliberately conducted himself in a dishonest fashion, as some of his critics have accused him of doing. However, I do believe the evidence shows that he's not as good as his reputation suggests. This isn't to say that Otz is not good at Dead by Daylight. Otz can play all killers quite proficiently, and that's something that takes quite a bit of skill. He also has an understanding of all manner of loops, which also takes a bit of knowledge and skill. He's a skilled entertainer and hype man, and holds opinions that are popular in the Dead by Daylight community, even if they are incorrect. So it's no question why Otz is the most popular Dead by Daylight content creator. However, this does not make him among the top Dead by Daylight players either. That said, if I were playing against the teams of survivors like Otz was playing against during his experiment, I never would have quit playing Killer. And I, for one, am not about to say that I'm as skilled as Otz. So what is the ultimate takeaway from all of this? For starts, the game is absolutely survivor-sided, and has been for many years. In fact, there was no reason to even test this since it's simply a matter of mathematics. Generators take 2 minutes and 40 seconds to complete without perks or toolboxes, and the gates take 20 seconds to open. The only reason survivors take longer than 4 minutes to escape is because they aren't doing generators, or they aren't evading the killer well. It really is just that simple. And what about the data gathered from watching Otz? Well, Otz's gameplay was actually eye-opening for me, and I never thought I would ever end up saying this, but after watching both iterations of this experiment, maybe there is something to following the Survivor Handbook after all. Now, obviously, I don't mean the more extreme takes, but Otz's experiment does prove that camping, tunneling, and slugging is overall harmful to the game and likely the cause of many needless nerfs to killers over the years by skewing kill rates higher than they should be. I mean, it's already well known that the devs don't really do much nuanced data collection, if at all. So when the devs see killers with a high average rate of kills, they don't bother asking how a killer got those kills, much in the same way they don't ask how a survivor escaped a match when, determining rank for their SBMM. The only goal is to balance the killer around a kill rate of 2.0, and since the devs can't nerf camping, tunneling, or slugging, the end result is releasing weak killers while nerfing existing killers and releasing more overpowered survivor perks or needlessly buffing survivor perks. More importantly, this begs the question of just how survivor-sided the devs are, or even if the devs are only survivor-sided because of the balance problems presented by camping, tunneling, and slugging. This provided me with a new insight as to why the devs have shrugged off killer complaints regarding balance for so many years, because according to their numbers, killers on average are overperforming and need to be nerfed, even though they're actually very weak in-game. So what then? Are killers just supposed to let survivors win? Well, after analyzing this experiment, yes, that is essentially what killers need to do if they can't win without camping, tunneling, or slugging. I know it's hard to hear, but otherwise the devs don't get to see how badly killers are really struggling against survivors. And thus, they also fail to see how stressful and not fun it is to play killer, even casually. By accepting losses, and yes, there will be many, the devs will start to see data that properly reflects the real power, or rather lack thereof, of killers instead of seeing stats boosted by unsportsmanlike playstyles. Of course, this would require the killer side of the community to set aside their egos and their hunger for that sweet, sweet W in order to see real improvements in the game that can help make it fun for both sides to play, even at high skill. And with that, I want to thank everyone for watching. If you like the content and are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring that bell for notifications of when more videos go live. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on the video if you liked it. But that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for watching. We'll see all of you guys in the next video. Bye.